and his anger at the Scottish media, who he feels have been unfair both to him and the SNP. For political opponents, he had contempt.
When we were up here for the referendum vote, there was a spirit and a positive enthusiasm. Well, the control freaks have blown it away. They have replaced it with fear and intimidation the very same way as others have before them.
A dig there at Labour, although it wasn't a political speech. It was an emotional plea.
And the only thing left to do is to vote, and vote again. And I'll be right with you. Thank you very much.
Those who heard him were convinced, but they're the converted. What about people outside?
Who cares what he thinks? That's what I think and what everybody else thinks. He just acts, that's all. Just does a job like everybody else. Just because he's a movie star doesn't mean that I'm going to vote for him. I don't know who to vote for, but I won't vote him for SNP anyway.
A celebrity always helps some to make up their minds, but on the whole, I would think that the hardcore support would always be there.
The reaction of the other political parties to the arrival of Sean Connery in the scene has ranged from patronising to dismissive. But of course the truth is, if they had Sean Connery backing them, they would have done exactly the same thing.
Elsewhere on the campaign trail today, all of the other parties were concentrating on education. Labour pledged more resources for nursery provision, this time targeting the under-3s. They argued the new Parliament will enable resources to be targeted more effectively.
Now, under a Scottish Parliament, what we can do is look at the whole issue of nursery education, nursery provision, Scottish education in the broadest sense, childcare in the broadest sense, in a way that we've never been able to do previously.
The Conservatives slammed what they called Labour's lies on tuition fees, against them in opposition, but introducing them in government.
We're saying that when it comes to education, with Labour it has been failure. They've failed nurseries, they've failed primary and secondary schools, and they've failed our students by imposing their £3,000 tax on learning.
The Liberal Democrats also concentrated on education, this time funding, claiming that more money for education merely masked 2 years of cutbacks.
I think the problem we have at the moment is that Labour's cynical manipulation of official figures has let down pupils, and in health spending it's also let down patients.
Labour's opponents today also appealed to voters to use their second vote to deny the party of government an overall majority. Today was a good day for the SNP in publicity terms, and they needed it. The latest opinion poll published this morning shows Labour with an 18-point lead. They look set for a comfortable victory.
Bernard Ponsonby reporting there. You're watching Scotland Today.
And still to come on Monday's Scottish News, a widow's plea. It's time to make
Fight for Falkirk.
Just the colour of his jacket that's unlikely to fade, but the colour of his politics too. The veteran left-winger met his new Labour opponent out campaigning, an odd feeling for a man who has been a Labour MP for 25 years. But he lost his membership when he signed his nomination papers to stand against the party, believing he'd been left off the list of approved candidates because of his forthright and old Labour views. So is Falkirk West a referendum on New Labour?
In some respects, yes. I mean, I think that there is concern about what has been described as a control freak tendency, but there's also concern about some of the policies being pursued by New Labour, the tuition fees, for example, and the abolition of student grants. I mean, I just couldn't vote for that kind of rubbish in the House of Commons.
But Labour's candidate is playing down the Canavan factor and warning that a split in the Labour vote between himself and his well-known opponent could let the SNP take the seat.
Tony Blair at the Scottish Conference this year said whether people see themselves or others see them as old Labour, as New Labour, as Social Democrat, as Democratic Socialist, it doesn't really matter because our values are still the same. Traditional Labour values still run right through the Labour Party's manifesto. They still run right through our programme. They're in our heart and our soul.
The Nationalists came second in the general election, but nearly 12,000 votes behind Labour. However, in Falkirk at least, there are signs of optimism.
Falkirk West very much is a now three-way marginal seat, and the opinion poll which came out over the weekend in one of the national Sunday papers indicates that the SNP are ahead within this three-way contest, and our canvass returns are showing that's very much the case.
Liberal Democrat Andrew Smith at 21, one of the youngest candidates for the Scottish Parliament, and Gordon Miller for the Conservatives know their chances are negligible. 2 years ago the Lib Dems barely saved their deposit and the Conservatives came a distant third. Most independents struggle against the electoral machines of the big parties, but Denis Canavan has strong local support and a well-kent face. Falkirk's best-known campaigner for a Scottish Parliament may be the only independent to sit in it.
Ross Harper there. And there are a total of 5 candidates standing in the Falkirk West constituency in the election on May the 6th.
Now, coming up.
Should be the equal